thank you very much for asking me to come. I should also say that in addition to my role with the Professional Standards Authority, I'm also a lay member on the Research and Ethics Committee, so I'm a huge fan of people who work in clinical research, just to let you know that before we begin. So I thought I'd just start by telling you a little bit about us. Some of you may be familiar with our role, others may not. We're a bit like one of those things we sort of sit behind the scenes and you don't notice as much unless something really goes wrong. But so Professional Standards Authority, we were actually set up in about 2003 off the back of the Bristol Inquiry. It was a recommendation of the Bristol Inquiry that a body should be set up to oversee and to try to coordinate the various regulatory bodies that are in existence. So in the health profession regulation field, there are currently 10 statutory regulators for the health and care professions. And we were set up to make sure that regulators, who obviously interact a lot with the professions, remain focused on public protection. So we're there as a bit of a counterbalance in the system to make sure that everything tilts towards public protection. And we do that by overseeing the 10 regulators that I've mentioned also, and then from 2012 a new role, which was to set standards for voluntary registers and to accredit those that met the standards. And the reason for that really sort of came out of a long series of discussions and experience of statutory regulation and recognition by various governments that actually statutory regulation wasn't necessarily needed to manage every risk within the health and social care arena, but that there needed to be another way of providing assurance about the quality, safety, the training that people undertaking various work within health and social care provided to the people. And from that was born the idea of accredited registers. And the reason that I'm here talking to you is because I was originally asked to do the work on developing that. So I met with a vast range of voluntary registers covering a huge variety of different occupations to understand what it is that everybody did, to understand what the kind of risks were that might be facing the public through the delivery of their work, and then to design with them the standards that we eventually set for accredited registers. And having done so, my chief executive said, well, now you can be responsible for delivering it. So I've stayed with it really since the beginning of its design and its delivery so far. The Professional Standards Authority itself is established by Act of Parliament. We're an independent body, so we're not an arm's length body of the Department of Health. We are entirely separate from them, and we report to the Health Select Committee. So that's our route. And every year we provide an annual report to Parliament, both in Parliament in Westminster, but also in Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales, telling them sort of how effectively the regulators are discharging their responsibilities. And we also, of course, also provide information about the Accredited Registers programme to them as well. You'll be aware from interaction with other health professionals such as doctors and nurses and occupational therapists and physiotherapists and a variety of others that some people are required by law to be on a register and that they can't practice unless they are registered. And if you're a doctor, it's a criminal offence to hold oneself out as a doctor when one is not. And the Accredited Registers programme works instead with voluntary registers. So the majority of voluntary registers are either held by professional bodies who originally would have had a list of members, but actually who set standards and who perform roles not dissimilar to that of statutory regulators in many ways, and that they have complaints processes about their members. And then others are held by bodies that have been expressly established for that role. So the Academy for Healthcare Sciences, and you'll hear from Janet later on, is one of those. Another one I would cite as being an example of that is the Complementary and Natural Healthcare Council, which was established with government funding initially, and another one would be the United Kingdom Public Health Register, which similarly was a voluntary register and was originally established with government support. So any organisation that wants to be accredited by us has to meet the 11 standards that we set. I say there are 11 standards because it always sounds good when it sounds like a small number. Of course, they are broken down into subsets. But they cover the areas that you would expect. So they cover education and training that people undertake. They cover the register, so there has to be a public register that members of the public, employers and others can search. Information about any disciplinary action taken by anybody on that register, taken against anybody on that register, also has to be in the public domain. There has to be a proper complaints procedure, and there needs to be a commitment to developing an evidence base, if there is one, or forming one, for the particular profession that's being practiced, and ongoing sort of continuing fitness to practice professional development by the register. I actually see it as a key strength of the Accredited Registers programme, curiously enough, that it is voluntary, that people choose to join it. And the thing I often say to people is regulation really only works when people see themselves as a profession and they are committed themselves to meeting standards, providing good care and treatment for the public. It needs to be a group of people with skills, knowledge and experience and the right values, and probably chief amongst those, actually you mentioned compassion earlier on, Carrot, is exactly that. It's about being motivated by the good of the patient, by the good of the public. And that's something that's a core component of all of both the statutory regulators and also the registers which we've accredited. And it's one of the things which our board said right at the beginning is most important, is that a register demonstrates that it is committed to protecting the public, and the people who are part of that register are committed to providing good care and treatment and being the best they can at the profession that they undertake. The difference, I should have said that before I clicked onto the next slide, but the main difference about it is the fact that it's not compulsory to be on it. So what that means is that it is possible for somebody to be taken off an accredited register and still continue to practice, still continue to be employed to do whatever it is that they do. We have an agreement amongst the accredited registers that they will not register another person who's been removed by one register, so we provide a kind of a network of assurance, but it does mean that it's an important thing that employers know to check that somebody is on a register and hasn't been removed from it. And I mentioned the thinking that had been done by governments and so on beforehand, which led to the development of this, and I think Fiona mentioned it during her presentation to you at the beginning as well. We tend to talk in terms of the Professional Standards Authority of there being a continuum of assurance, which goes from no controls at all, employer controls, now through accredited registers and statutory regulation. And what we say is that we need to think about the risk to the public, and we're talking about uncontrolled risks. So this is where we start to factor in things like, is something well governed through other mechanisms? What's the uncontrolled? What's the raw risk to the patients of harm that still needs to be controlled? And that sort of indicates where somebody might need to fall in relation to the work that they undertake, the duties that they undertake along this continuum of assurance. And so we have the accredited registers, which I would put as a sort of a more moderate level of control. It's much stronger than employer-led control. It's not as strong as statutory regulation because it doesn't have the compulsory element, which means that it effectively bans you from working in that occupation in the future. So, if you are an organisation that's been accredited by us, the first thing you have to demonstrate is that you've got a register of health and care practitioners. And a register is more than just a list. A register means that you've sent entry requirements to get onto it, quite rigorous entry requirements for people to join, and that the register is going to check and validate the information that's been provided to allow somebody on that. Once it's been accredited by us, it's awarded the quality mark, the Professional Standards Authority Accredited Registers mark, which means that the organisation that holds the register has been accredited and made display, and so can all of the practitioners. So once you're on an accredited register, you're able to use that in any of the information that you send out to other people. And you probably won't be advertising the services, but you can see for some of the people on accredited registers, so counsellors and psychotherapists, for example, who work in independent practice, they would display this mark on their websites and to any patient-facing information, so that people know that they're part of this framework of assurance. And we don't set the standards for you. The register sets the standards for you. What we do is we set the standards for the organisation. So we require them to be well governed, to have good information systems, to have good complaints procedures, to have good risk management procedures, to have good processes for quality assuring the education and training that you undertake. And that's what we assess. The only stipulation we give to a register for all of you is to say that they must require all of you, through the standards that they set, to meet high standards of personal competence, technical competence, and where applicable business practice. So that's the only stipulation we make in relation specifically for all of you. Beyond that, the register sets its standards. So if you think of it as it's like a triple layer of protection, essentially, that we're offering here. So you have the protection from yourselves because you're committed to good standards and to training. You have the protection from the register because the register sets standards and quality assures the education and training and helps to encourage and develop your practice going forward and tells you if you're not behaving in quite the right way and gets you to correct that. So you have that layer of protection, and then you have us making sure that the register is actually operating well and operating to good standards. So between us all, you can see that we provide good protection for the public and help to provide good care and treatment for them going forward. So far we've got 25 registers, 88,000 registrants, about 50 different occupations. We do accredit more than one register, as it were, in one occupational professional area. So in counselling and psychotherapy, I think there are 10 distinct professional bodies who have their registers accredited by us. In play therapy, there are 2, public health there's only 1, complementary therapies there are 2, complementary therapy, 3 complementary therapy registers. But we are growing all the time, and for those people who work with an independent practice, really, what we're offering is a sort of a form of consumer protection. What we're saying to members of the public is, if you're going to go and get treatment from somebody, please choose either somebody who's on a statutory register who's regulated, or choose a practitioner who's on an accredited register, because that's what gives you the protection. For the register themselves, in 2015 we did a report asking the registers sort of how it had been for them really going through our accreditation process, and they all said that although they find it tough, they find it incredibly helpful because it gets them to really closely examine their systems, and they have all made improvements, and we can see that over the years. And the stance we take on this is that we want people to meet our standards, because that is what's good for the public. So we split our accreditation process into 2. We have the team who will work with a register that's interested in becoming accredited to explain our standards and to suggest where they might need to improve in order to meet the requirements. And then there is an accreditation panel which awards accreditation once it's assessed that they're actually met. But that's the stance that we take on that. It helps to get a better recognition of the register itself and of the registrants. By virtue of them being accredited, we're seeing some moves in counselling and psychotherapy now, where those of you involved in IAPT programs, I'm sure your second speaker will be well aware of that, but they're now looking very much at accredited registers and wanting people to be part of that. It also means that we can help to amplify any message that your register, that your profession needs to have government and others listen to. And you're part of a network of registers, so there is sharing of learning and good practice between the registers themselves. And the value for practitioners, you're part of a government-backed assurance that the government has asked us to operate and recognised. You have the Just Quality mark to be able to demonstrate to your employers and to others that you're part of this programme. It is recognised by NHS employers. NHS employers always carry updates of the registers that we've accredited for them by the commissioners and by the public. And you're part of a community, not just within your own profession, but wider within health and social care, who are all of you committed to high standards. And it clearly helps the public, because even if they don't know that you're part of an accredited register, the fact is that what you're likely to be doing is going to be that much better for patients and the public, so they benefit from that. It does also give them a way of recognising and distinguishing, if they're working particularly in independent, pulling people from independent healthcare, they've got a way of distinguishing between people who should be good and people who might not be. It helps the public, because it means that if they do have the misfortune to need to be able to complain about somebody, that there is a robust complaints procedure and that they will be treated well by the organisation to whom they are complaining and assisted through that complaints process. And we're at the end of it all trying to make sure it all works effectively. I won't go sort of dwell on this in detail, but I think you'll have picked up from the things that I've said already why it's important for employers. I think you can see the value for that. I can see it certainly from the work I do with the Research and Ethics Committee, that very little research is just local, a lot of it is national, a lot of it is global, and you can see that having some standardisation across this sector would be extraordinarily helpful.